everyone, it's Hailey, and today I'm going to be doing a September wrap-up. So I have been doing recent reads videos in place of wrap-ups, which is basically where whenever I read like 5 or 6 books, I would do a little wrap-up for them because I'd be able to go more into depth about the books that I'm talking about. And I was enjoying doing them, but last time I did one, I asked if you guys would be more interested in a wrap-up again because I noticed quite a few comments complaining about the length of them. So I'm trying a wrap-up now. There were a lot of people who wanted recent reads still, but I'm also like, you're the people who are watching the recent reads, so it makes sense. But I'm just kind of experimenting, seeing how it goes. I might do recent reads but divide it by rating. I'm really not sure yet, but I just decided to do a wrap up for September again. So this is the first time I've done this in a very long time, and I have quite a few great books to talk about. I read a total of 11 books over the course of September. One of those was a novella, but still, I'm super happy with that, really excited about it. I feel like I've kind of been turning my reading around a lot this year, and I'm excited for Bookmas and everything to talk more about that. But I have some great just like random reads, but I also have quite a few fall themed reads here because I started early this year, as you guys know. So let's just dive right in. Also, actually, I read 2 fantasy books. So I've read my first 2 fantasy books of 2020, and I'm super excited about that. But anyways, like I was saying, let's dive right in. So the first book that I read in September was Tweet Cute by Emma Lord. This is a story following Pepper and Jack, Pepper Jack Cheese. I love that so much, but it makes sense because the whole premise for this is that Pepper's family owns this big kind of McDonald's type franchise fast food restaurant that is coming out with a grilled cheese. And Jack's family owns a small family deli where they have his grandmother's grilled cheese recipe, which Pepper's family's big franchise ends up stealing. So they end up getting in a Twitter war, and it's this meme war that starts going on, but they are doing that behind the scenes, but then they also start to have a relationship in real life. And he's the class clown, she's kind of the goody two-shoes overachiever, so they've never really gotten along before, but they start to discover that they have a lot more in common than they thought and that they make a really good match. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I had heard nothing but amazing things about this book, and I think that kind of ended up working out a little bit to my detriment. I was expecting a little bit more from it, I guess, and it just never, something about it just didn't bring it to that extra level that a 4 or 5 star book would have. I do think this was a really great story. The writing was amazing. There was such great banter between the characters, and it was very witty, which I really appreciated. Like the Pepper Jack Cheese thing, that was just kind of the start of the wit that this book had, and it was a very enjoyable read overall. I thought the premise of a Twitter war was very interesting for the background of this story, and the romance overall was really adorable. I think that Pepper and Jack were very well matched characters, and I could totally believe in them falling in love, and their relationship just seemed to really make sense. There was also the added element of this app that is at the school that Jack actually made. So there's this app where they can talk to each other, but they won't know who is who, so it randomly will reveal each other, like them to each other, if that makes any sense at all. Basically, they've been connecting on the app, but they don't know that they're talking to each other on the app. So it's kind of like Alex approximately in that way. It definitely reminded me of that, but that was just kind of like a small thing to it. It was a fun added element that I enjoyed. There also was a lot of family issues brought into it and kind of dealing with the expectations of parents, and they both had different family situations. So Pepper's family is kind of, she feels like it's falling apart. Things have really changed since they've moved from Nashville to New York. So now she's living in this big city, and her father stayed behind. They don't get along anymore. There's some issues with her sister. So there's definitely some relationship, family drama going on there that needs to be figured out. And Pepper feels like the obligation to take over this Twitter account, which is like, it would be kind of like running like McDonald's Twitter, which seems terrifying for like a high school student to be running a Twitter account like that is just really terrifying. But the Twitter war was actually really cool. I thought the tweets were very intelligent and made me laugh. But getting back to the family thing, Jack has a lot of pressure on him because he thinks that the expectation is on him to take over the family deli because his twin brother is like the star golden boy, and it's always been on him to like have this big future. So Jack has kind of put himself in a box. So there's a lot of issues outside of the relationship drama and outside of the restaurant drama going on, and that was really cool. Really, overall, this was a very enjoyable opposites attract romance. It definitely has made me more interested in what the author is going to come out with next, and I had a lot of fun reading it. I just think my expectations were too high. Next, I read Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. So this follows Chloe Brown, who is chronically ill, and she has a near-death experience, and after that she realizes that her life was flashing before her eyes and she felt like there wasn't that much to see. So she creates this bucket list of a few things that she wants to do to try and get herself out there and get her to get a life. She ends up employing the help of Red, who is a tattooed handyman with a motorcycle, and that is where their love story begins. So this I really wanted to love. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, but I think it kind of might be a little bit closer to a 3 or 3.5 out of 5 stars. I'm definitely going to read the rest of the novels in this series. It's a series of companion novels that follows each sister because Chloe has 2 sisters, Eve and Danny, and the one about, is it Danny Brown, I believe? I think that's the one that's out. I do own it. I can't remember who it's about, but they all are really different sisters, and I loved the dynamic between the 3 of them. It reminded me of my own sisters, which was really enjoyable to read about. My main issue with this is I was kind of bored. I just didn't feel like there was a lot happening. I guess I like to have a little bit more drama in my romances than there was in this one. I don't know, I felt it was super sweet, don't get me wrong. Like, the characters were adorable. They were both just like sweet little cinnamon buns. It was so cute, but apart from that, there just wasn't a lot going on. I did like the representation of her being chronically ill. I thought that was really well done, and also the fact that there was a cat, that was a thumbs up from me, but I think I wanted a little bit more story to it. This also dealt with an abusive relationship and surviving that abusive relationship, so that was an added element that I wasn't expecting, that I thought was very well done, and that added a lot to my reading experience. I liked that. This kind of was a hate to love sort of romance, but I didn't feel like the hate really made that much sense, which is kind of a pet peeve of mine. So I'm not a huge fan of enemies to lovers or hate to love, and I felt like this one was really low-key because it didn't really have much of a foundation, the hatred, so I couldn't really believe that or buy into it. This was just super wholesome overall though, and it was really cute. Like, super adorable romance. One of the cutest romances I've read. I think it was a little bit too low-key for my personal taste. But if you are looking for a wholesome and lighthearted romance, definitely check this out. I think it's for sure worth the read. Like I said, I'm going to continue because I think maybe I might just like the other sisters' perspectives and storyline a little bit more. Next, I read Blood for Blood by Ryan Graudin. So I actually don't have my copy because my dad has borrowed it. I convinced my sister and my dad to read them. Like, I didn't even contact them about it, but it was really funny because after I finished posting that I had finished Blood for Blood, I posted on Instagram because I was like shook by it, and both my sister and my dad messaged me that day asking about those books, and my sister ordered it and my dad borrowed it, so I hope that they like them too. But this is the sequel to Wolf by Wolf, which I read earlier in the year, and Wolf by Wolf, if you don't know, is a World War II historical fiction alternate history story where the Nazis won the war. So you follow a character who is a survivor of a death camp, and she escaped and she was experimented upon, so she was left with this ability to skin shift. So she ends up skin shifting into looking like the victor of this motorcycle race that they hold annually, and whoever wins this motorcycle race gets to meet Hitler. So she skin shifts into this girl who had won the race before because she has a mission. She's working for the resistance and she wants to get close enough to Hitler to be able to kill him. So her mission is to kill Hitler. it seems very convoluted. Honestly, like anytime I feel like I'm talking about this book and I'm trying to explain it, I feel like it just doesn't do it justice because it seems so weird and like it wouldn't work, but it totally does. I'm obviously not going to say that much about Blood for Blood because it is the sequel. I also read, that's the novella that I read, Iron, is it Iron for Iron or Iron to Iron? I think it's Iron to Iron, but I read that, which is set before Wolf by Wolf begins, and you follow Luca and the victor that the girl is skin shifting into. I can't think of her name right now. Is it Adele? Yes, it is Adele. Anyways, that was also really cool, very enjoyable. I gave that a 4 out of 5 stars, I believe, but Blood for Blood, I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. It was one of my favorite sequels that I've ever read, if not my favorite sequel. I really enjoyed Wolf by Wolf, but I enjoyed Blood for Blood even more. It was very different because in the first book you're following the motorcycle race, and in the second book you don't really have that element to it, but it kept me on the edge of my seat the entire time. I had no clue what was going to happen. It was a high stakes situation, and it, like, the action got the ball rolling right in the beginning and it never really stopped. And I just, like, it absolutely wrecked me. There were so many things that happened. Like, I wasn't not expecting them, but it still was like heartbreaking and a punch to the gut. It just, everything about it was a lot. I really don't want to say that much more, but if you haven't read the Wolf by Wolf duology, I highly recommend it. I think it is very underrated. It's super interesting, and yeah, it was just top-notch, very, very good. So next, I finally felt like I could pick up my first fantasy of 2020, which was House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. Technically, I read The Betrothed by Kiera Cass, which is arguably a fantasy, but I didn't feel that it was all that fantastical, and I didn't really like it, so I'm not counting it. I feel like this one counts a little bit more because there is some magic to it and everything. So basically, like, my first high fantasy, it's my first fantasy, okay? So this is a dark retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses. It's kind of horror, kind of thriller. Like, it wasn't something I could really read at night, but I'm also a chicken, so keep that in mind. I think it was pretty mild. There were some times where I was like, ooh, I don't like that at all. Like, just, I don't know, when I read something scary, I build it up more in my head, so then I can't sleep, and that's exactly what was happening. Like, it wasn't that bad in the actual book, but I just kept on building it up more and more because I read it right before I was going to bed, and then I was like, no, I can't read this anymore. But then I just kept on thinking about it, so I had a very restless sleep that night. I think I read this in like 2 or 3 days though. I read it very, very quickly. It completely sucked me in, and it was super interesting and really good. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I'd heard a lot of good things about this book, like really rave reviews, but I was kind of skeptical, to be honest. But no, it was very good and the perfect kind of September read because it has the October horror sort of element to it, but it's also very nautical. Like, the whole manor that they're at is sea-based and everything, so there's a lot of oceanic stuff happening. So I don't know, that makes me think of summer. I don't know if that really makes sense, but like, it did to me. It felt like the right time to read it. This was really weird and an interesting twist on the 12 Dancing Princesses story. Dancing is definitely like an element to it. I feel like it did do a good job of paying homage to the fairy tale that it's retelling, but also definitely really twisting it to create something very weird and twisted, and like, that leaves you questioning what's real and who you can trust overall, especially like as you get further into the story. You're kind of like, it's this slow descent into madness, and you're like, I don't know what to believe or who to believe or what I'm seeing or what I'm reading, and it's just aggravating, but also makes you want to keep reading because you want to know what's happening. Like, what's been happening in this book, I didn't really go over that much, but our main character, Anna Lee, used to be one of 12 sisters, but slowly they've been dying off, and there are like 6 of them left at the beginning of this book. So you're kind of like, is another one gonna die? Like, when is it gonna happen? How is it gonna happen? Because Anna Lee realizes that she doesn't think that the deaths were accidental or just happened. She thinks that there are suspicious circumstances surrounding it, so she starts to investigate that a little bit more. So This was kind of a murder mystery as well as being a little spooky horror story and a fantastical story too. So it had a lot going on in it, but I think it did all of that very well and it blended seamlessly together. There was a love triangle in this story that felt kind of forced and I didn't really care for that element to it. I didn't really care for the romance overall. That wasn't really why I was reading it. I was more interested in the mystery aspect and in the sisters and that family dynamic there between them. Overall, I think this was a super cool fantasy, perfect for this time of year. It really thrived on suspense because it's an edge of your seat kind of read, and it managed to be heartbreaking but also a wild ride all at once. So really cool, and I will definitely be reading more of this author's stuff. Next, I read Iron Cast by Destiny Soria. So this is a historical fiction and another kind of fantastical story actually that is set in 1919, and you have these two characters who can perform these illusions and these spells kind of. Basically they say like old poetry and stories and songs. I think it's really like poetry and songs, and they can kind of hypnotize people. So they use that ability to con people during the day, but at night they work at this bar to make like performances with it. In exchange for that, they're offered protection by the barkeep, but things start going awry and there's some mysterious things that start happening. I know that was a really bad description, but to be honest, I listened to the audiobook for this one and it jumped right into the story. And I kind of felt at first like there might be something wrong with my audiobook, like I thought it was a me thing, but it just jumped right into the story. And sometimes that's fine, but I liked the magic system a lot. I felt like it was really cool, but I also didn't feel like it was ever fully explained. So I'm still kind of confused by it, even though I have finished this book. It was very interesting. Like eventually I was like, oh, okay, so they're using these poems and that's how they're like doing things. But I kind of was also like, but what? Because it just like it hopped right into things. I was just kind of taken aback by that almost. Now you have two main characters in this book and they both felt pretty similar, to be honest. They were very cookie cutter. There wasn't really that much to make them stand out, and I struggled with that a little bit. I do think that it was a very atmospheric read and that sucked me into it, but apart from the atmosphere, I felt like there were things that were done not to their full potential, unfortunately. Overall, I just really had a disconnect to the characters in the story that left me feeling like the whole thing was lacking, and I'm very disappointed by that because I do think it had a lot of potential. I just think that there were some things that were missing for me, and that unfortunately really hindered my reading experience. But I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, so it was solid. It just didn't blow me away, and it's not a book that I'm really going to remember. I did want to mention, because I was looking at my notes to make sure that I caught everything, but I did like the relationship between the two characters. They were just way too similar, so it kind of made it a little bit hard to read at times just because I felt like they were pretty much the same and neither of them were really super interesting. Next, I read actually another sequel. Who am I? I have multiple fantasies in here and I have 2 sequels. I'm actually reading sequels. What's happening? But I read Shiny Broken Pieces by Dhonielle, Clayton, and Sona, Charaipotra. This is the sequel to Tiny Pretty Things, which I read earlier in the year and really enjoyed. And that is a story about Manhattan Ballet School, and you follow 3 different characters who all have a very different perspective on things. So it's a very well-rounded story. Tons of drama in it though, like lots of things happening. It's just following the cutthroat world of trying to be the prima ballerina for all 3 of these girls and what that journey looks like for all of them. Tiny Pretty Things left off on a cliffhanger, so I was really eager to pick this one up and see how I would like it. I think I gave Tiny Pretty Things, did I give it? I think like a 3.75 out of 5 stars. That sounds pretty accurate. Maybe a 4. This one I gave a 3. I didn't not like it, but I was a little bit let down by it. I found that there was a lot more kind of dragging of feet and the story didn't hook me as much as the first one did. There were certain characters that were my favorite in the first one that I ended up like I don't know, having a bit of a hard time with them. I felt like the characterization seemed to switch a lot, and while I understood that, I didn't really care for it. So Gigi was my favorite character in the first one, but in this one I would say that June was my favorite character overall. There also was the introduction of a new character who's mentioned frequently in the first book, but I didn't feel like that was used to its full potential. I at first thought that it was going to be a new perspective, but that didn't carry throughout the story, and I think that could have been really cool. I think it just kind of ended up being a vehicle for something else, but I thought that that character could have been used a lot more to do some interesting things. I didn't dislike this by any means. I still enjoyed listening to the audiobook. I would still recommend the series as a whole. I think it was very enjoyable. I just think this one was a little bit slower and a bit less interesting for me personally than the first one. But I think maybe my expectations were a little bit higher going in this time because I did enjoy the first one a lot, and the first one I didn't really know what to expect. So it was just kind of, I don't know, it just happened that way, and I'm kind of sad about it, but I'm glad that I read this. Like, it was enjoyable. Also, So Tiny Pretty Things is being adapted by Netflix, but if you look at IMDb, like the characters, I'm like, did I read the same book? Because there's like, I don't know, it's very confusing. The characters have different names and stuff, and like, I have no clue what they're gonna do with the adaptation, but my expectations for that are super, super low to say the least, but I will still watch it. Next is When We Were Magic by Sarah Gailey. I had received this book unsolicited way back, I don't even know when. I think it was maybe at the end of 2019, but it's a story about queer witches, and it's a group of 6 girls who are all very close friends, and they are witches, and there is this huge scandal that opens up this story, and basically a spell kind of went wrong. Like, one of the girls can't really control her magic, the main character and protagonist whose perspective we're reading from, and something ends up going awry, so she calls her friends to help her out, and they keep on doing these spells to try and fix things, but ultimately it just keeps on making it worse and worse and worse. So when I opened this up, I thought it was gonna be really funny because like literally the first line is like talking about how she didn't mean to kill the guy and she's just nervous and condoms are more complicated than she was expecting. So obviously the thing that happens is someone ends up dead, but like I was like, that seems like really interesting and like what is happening here? Now, what I loved about this was it was super, super diverse. It had so many different characters, and there were a lot of characters, which I didn't love that there were a lot because I felt like it kind of ended up leaving some of them behind, but every single one of them was very diverse, which was super refreshing. Now, however, our main character was like my least favorite. I enjoyed the relationship that she ended up having, which is a female-female relationship. However, the journey was not enjoyable. If this story had been told from a different girl's perspective, I think I would have had a better time with it because it was just a lot of whining, and it just was like a lot of lack of communication, and the bad kind. Like sometimes I feel like that can be done and it's like, okay, I understand, and it doesn't annoy me as much, but this instance, it very much annoyed me. Like it made it really difficult to read. I don't know, I don't really want to say anything more about that because I don't want to like spoil anything, but one of my other main gripes with it that made me have a very, very hard time getting into this, and it's kind of like, it's one of those things where I feel like you have to have a certain suspension of disbelief, but in this case, I just couldn't do it. Usually I'm okay with that, but I couldn't do it. So this guy dies, and it's just kind of like, meh. Like, she's upset about it, but, and that's not a spoiler, it happens like right in the very beginning. Like I told you that, like literally like the first sentence. So I felt like the consequences and the emotions attached to that were not adequate, and that was very bothersome for me. I just didn't feel like there was enough care there, and it just, I don't know, something about that I just did not like. So I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars overall. Like, I don't think it was a bad book. I had a good time reading it. I just did have numerous issues going through it, and a lot of it was like the fact that there's this guy dead and she's whining about kind of inconsequential and trivial things, and that made her a really hard character to get behind, and the fact that it was from her perspective was kind of sad. I kind of wish that it was from Roya's perspective, or literally anyone else, like Miriam, like any of them. It would have been better and more enjoyable for me. So that sucks, but it was good. Next, I picked up Serious Moonlight by Jenn Bennett. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. This is like my 4th or 5th Jenn Bennett novel overall, and I'm pretty sure it's the 4th one that I've read this year. No, it's the 3rd that I've read this year, because I read Starry Eyes and Alex Approximately this year, and this was the last one that I have of her contemporaries that I haven't read yet. She has a new one coming out in November that I'm definitely going to be picking up, and then, or does she have, I think she has another one that's out already, and then one coming out in November. I can't remember, but the point is, this is a fall kind of one. It's set during the summer, but it just feels like a fall read, to be honest, like the perfect fall contemporary. So her main character really loves mystery novels. She's super into that. And her love interest, he is a magician, which is super fun. But they are both working at this hotel together. And there's this reclusive, mysterious author who has been going to this hotel. So they team up to try and figure out this whole mystery surrounding him and why he's there. So that mystery plotline, I felt like in the beginning was super into it. Kind of in the middle, I was like, I don't know where this is going. And then in the end, I understood everything, but there was a little bit of a lull in the middle. I love the fact that Jenn Bennett gives her characters really interesting hobbies. I've said this before, but I just think like she doesn't, I don't know. I'm sorry, my memory card was full, but we're back. So what I was saying is hobbies are kind of a hard thing to write. Like you get stuck in, I don't know, the typical sort of hobbies that you're used to, but she always comes up with interesting ones. Like the fact that she's into mystery novels and the fact that he's a magician, and it's nerdy and quirky and cute, but like not over the top. It's just kind of like something that he does. I will say one thing that bugs me about this cover, and this is so minor, but she's always written in the book as having a flower in her hair, and she's not on the cover, and that really bugs me. I don't know why, but I did feel the need to mention that. So this is set in Seattle, and I felt like the setting was very prevalent to the story as well, which was interesting. I think maybe because when I think of Seattle, I think of like rain and dreariness, not in a bad way. It's just like how I think of Vancouver too. So that kind of contributed to the fall vibes for me, even though it is not set during the fall. I feel like Jenn Bennett also writes interesting families, because generally the mother is not present, and that was the same for our main character. Her mother's not present, but she does have her aunt as a maternal figure. So her mother had her when she was very, very young, and then she passed away when she was very young as well. And she's left with her aunt as her guardian, also her grandfather. And I did like the family dynamics going on there. They always come into her stories, which was fun. Now, the relationship was adorable. I loved Daniel. He is one of my favorite love interests that I've read in a little bit, and I think he might be my favorite of her love interest specifically. I felt like they were very well matched, and I believed the romance overall and was very invested. This is another story that actually jumped like right into it, but I think this one did it a little bit more successfully than Ironcast did, and that might be because it's a contemporary, so it made a bit more sense to me. So while this did have some lulls to it, overall I felt like the story was really cool and very different from other contemporaries that I've read, and I very much enjoyed it and would definitely recommend it for fall. I think it is great for this time of year, but also any time of year. But I don't know, I just feel like most of the fall books that I recommend are like more mystery focused and those sorts of books, so I'm happy to have a contemporary to recommend too. Next, I picked up Cinderella is Dead by Kalynn Bayron. This is the other fantasy book that I read. It's also a retelling. I don't know what it is with me in retellings and fantasy right now, but it's been working. So this is obviously a retelling of Cinderella, but it is a feminist retelling and kind of, once again, a dark reimagining of things. It definitely gets very, very dark. So the legend of Cinderella is kind of like a Bible for the people in the world of this book. Also, I want to mention, I feel like there's potential for a sequel because they mention, or kind of like a companion, because they mention other fairy tales here, and I feel like that might be where things are going, and I hope it does because I really liked this. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. But anyways, getting back on topic. So all these girls have to read the story of Cinderella. It's a very male-focused society, and then they go to this ball and they are supposed to be matched with a suitor, and they have to go with them. Like, there's really no choice to it, and if they go to the ball 3 times and they don't find anyone, then they disappear. So like, obviously that's very ominous. So the main character of this book is going to her first ball, and she wants wants nothing more than to not do that. She wants to run away with her best friend Erin, who she has been in love with her for a very long time, so it is a female-female romance as well. But she ends up running away, and she ends up meeting up with one of Cinderella's ancestors, her last survivor that no one knew that she actually survived. So there's a resistance movement that they are starting up to try and bring down this tyrannous king. I can't say that word. Tyrannous. You know what I'm trying to say, but this bad king, they're trying to bring him down and let these girls finally like not be forced to live with these husbands that they don't love and that are beating them, and it's just a terrible situation for everyone. Basically, they're going to topple the patriarchy. I surprisingly got like super sucked into this. I thought the world building was fantastic. It was super well done. I felt like it was done in a way where like there were some there weren't really info dumps, but there were some times where you would get quite a bit of information, but it also was like peppered throughout, well balanced. It felt like a well balanced meal. Our main character was super enjoyable for me to read. I felt like she was headstrong and fierce, and I could totally stand behind her and root for her. And I also loved her romantic journey. It was just very lovely, and I loved the relationship that she ended up with. I felt like it was so cute, but it was also just a good match overall, which I think really helped me to enjoy it. There were times where I was kind of like, I wasn't sure where things were gonna go, and I wasn't sure what was happening. I definitely required some suspension of disbelief with this book for certain things. I don't really want to say like specifically what, because it feels like kind of spoilery, but basically I was kind of like, I felt like the stakes seemed very high, but I also didn't feel like there was a lot of follow through on that at times, and that felt like, I don't know. I felt like there were a lot of things that seemed more risky, but they weren't really written as such. I don't think I explained that very well. Overall, this was very well done. I loved the writing of it. I loved the characters, and I thought it was a very interesting twist on Cinderella. Definitely unlike any Cinderella retelling I've ever read before, but it turned it on its head and made a lot of commentary about it that would also be applicable in real life, and I thought that was very interesting, and it made me think a lot about like how bad things could be, but also like how bad things are at the same time. So that was very interesting for me, but I think it was just a really solid retelling that I would definitely recommend. And the final book that I read in September, I actually unfortunately DNF'd. So I haven't really DNF'd that many books this year, and it's not because I haven't been letting myself DNF. I just haven't really had that many books that I felt the need to, but that was Odd and True by Kat Winters. So I actually got 211 pages into this specifically. So I was like, I wanted to keep going. I really did. But I was like, okay, once I get past like the halfway mark, which like I definitely was past the halfway mark, this is what I had left to read. I was like, if I'm still confused and don't really understand what's going on, I'm going to DNF it. So that's what I did. It's a monster story about these two sisters who are monster hunters, but I felt like I didn't really get that. It was like very slow, and it's told in dual perspective. So you have Odd and True, and those are the sisters' names. So Odd is the older sister, and her perspective is actually set back when they were kids. So it's kind of like piecing together the history of the sisters. And True's perspective is present day when Odd comes back and is like, okay, we're gonna go hunt for monsters, so she takes off with her. Now, True had polio, so she has a leg brace, and I felt like that disability rep was very well done. That was definitely a big plus for me. I just felt like there wasn't really anything going on, and I didn't get what was happening. I didn't get what the world was. I never really understood. I was like, are these monsters real? And I felt like, are they metaphorical? Like, it was just kind of weird. It was a very strange reading experience, and I've had this happen before. It's kind of similar, I think, to Ruby Red, when like if someone were to be like, oh, what happened in this book? Like, as I'm reading it, they're like, what's happened in this book? I would be like, I honestly don't really know. So that's that's why I decided to DNF it. I just didn't feel like it was worth continuing with. Now, I have read In the Shadow of Blackbirds by this author, really enjoyed it, and I have 2 more of her books actually, and I am still going to give them a chance. I just think that this one just wasn't for me. And it's funny because when I'm thinking of DNFing a book, I generally will go to Goodreads and look at some other reviews to see, like, does it get better, or like, is it just me? And this one, all I saw were like glowing reviews, like 4 and 5-star reviews, and I was like, what am I missing here? So I'm really sad that I didn't end up enjoying this one, that I couldn't see it through, but I just felt like it wasn't worth the time. I wasn't having a good time reading it, and since I've been like doing really well with the momentum with my reading, I didn't want to ruin that. So unfortunately, this just wasn't for me. So that is all for my September wrap up. I read quite a few books. I'm hoping this won't be too long, really, fingers crossed, but I hope that this was more enjoyable than recent reads. I don't really know. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do about that yet, but I'm hoping that October will be as successful of a reading month as September, because September ended up being a very lovely surprise with how well it went. So fingers crossed I can keep it up for the rest of the year. But thank you so much for watching today's video. If you have read any of these books, please let me know what you thought of them, and let me know what your favorite book was that you read in September. And yeah, I will see you guys in my next video soon. Bye!